It was a warm summer morning when I arrived at my lake cabin. The air smelled fresh, and the water glistened under the rising sun. I had been looking forward to this quiet getaway for weeks. As I unpacked my truck and carried bags inside the cabin, I felt an instant calm settle over me. But of course, peace never lasted long whenever Karen was nearby. Karen was the self-appointed ruler of the area. She believed she had authority over everyone and everything around the lake, even though she had no official position. By noon, I noticed her walking briskly toward my cabin, arms crossed, face tight with anger. "You cannot stay here," she snapped the second she reached my porch. "This property is for residents only, and guests must leave." I looked at her calmly, setting down my cooler on the deck. "Actually, Karen," I said evenly, "this cabin is mine. I have every right to be here." Her eyes narrowed, clearly not satisfied with my response. She stepped closer and pointed a finger at me, her voice rising so loud that birds scattered from the trees. "I do not believe you," she shouted. "You better pack your things right now, or I will call the police." I shook my head and tried to return to unpacking, hoping she would get bored and leave. But Karen was not the type to back down once she decided to stir up drama. Within minutes, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911, her voice dripping with exaggerated panic. "Hello, yes, I need officers right away," she cried. "There is a trespasser at the lake cabin. He refuses to leave and is threatening the neighborhood." I could hear the dispatcher on the other end trying to calm her, but she continued on, painting me as some sort of criminal. I simply leaned against the porch railing, waiting, because I knew what she did not. This confrontation was about to backfire on her in a way she would never forget. When the police arrived, 2 squad cars pulled up to the gravel road in front of the cabin, lights flashing. Karen rushed toward them, waving her arms dramatically. "That is him," she said, pointing right at me. "He is trespassing and refuses to leave. You need to arrest him." The officers turned to me, calm and professional, asking for my name and my side of the story. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder with property documents neatly tucked inside. "This is my cabin," I explained. "I have the deed right here." The officer looked over the paperwork, his eyes moving carefully across the pages. Then his expression shifted from neutral to surprised. He glanced back at me and then at Karen, who was already pacing, impatiently waiting for them to cuff me. "Ma'am," the officer said firmly, "I think you need to hear this." Karen stopped pacing, her face smug with confidence, certain that justice was on her side. But that smugness was about to vanish. The officer cleared his throat and held up the documents. "According to these papers," he said, "this cabin is not only his, but the surrounding land is in his name as well." Karen froze, the color draining from her face. "What do you mean?" she stammered. "That cannot be true. This land belongs to the community." "No, ma'am," the officer replied calmly. "It is clearly stated here. He owns this property and the land that extends around it." Karen took a step back, her voice shaking. "That is impossible. Nobody owns all of this." I looked straight at her and finally spoke. "I purchased the land years ago, Karen. Everything from the shoreline to the woods behind your house is mine." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of the lake water gently lapping against the dock. Karen's mouth opened and closed as if she were searching for words, but nothing came out. The officers crossed their arms, waiting to see if she had anything else to say. Instead, she stumbled over her words, trying to regain control of the situation. "Well, he should still follow the community rules," she muttered. "He cannot just do whatever he wants." The officer shook his head once again. "Ma'am, you have no authority here, and by the looks of this paperwork, he has more authority than anyone in this area." Karen's face turned pale, her bravado crumbling in front of the very officers she had called for backup. She glanced at me, then back at the officers, but every argument she had prepared seemed useless now. I leaned casually against the porch post, watching her squirm the same way she had made so many neighbors feel over the years. It was clear the balance of power had shifted, and for the first time Karen did not know how to respond. Karen's hands trembled as she clutched her phone tighter. The officers stood waiting, but she stayed frozen, unable to argue any further. The smug expression she usually wore was gone, replaced with disbelief. I took a slow step forward, my voice steady and calm. "Karen, for years you have tried to control everyone around this lake, but you never once bothered to learn who actually owns it. Her eyes flickered nervously, as if searching for an escape from the truth. One of the officers turned to me and asked if I wanted to press charges for false reporting. I shook my head. No, that will not be necessary. The lesson she just learned is enough for now. Karen turned sharply, her face red and pale at the same time, and stormed back down the gravel path toward her house. Her footsteps crunched angrily against the ground, but her voice was silent for once. The officers lingered a moment, making sure everything was in order, then offered a polite nod before heading back to their vehicles. When the squad cars drove away, the lake was quiet again. The sun dipped low, casting golden reflections across the water. I sat down on the porch chair, breathing in the calm air, knowing the peace I had come here to enjoy was finally mine. From my seat, I could see Karen pacing inside, her window curtains drawn back, but her usual confidence gone. It was the first time I had ever seen her look so small, so powerless against the truth that was now undeniable. I leaned back in the porch chair, listening to the quiet ripple of the lake and the soft breeze moving through the trees. The whole place felt lighter, as if the tension that Karen carried around had been swept away by the evening air. For once, the birds returned to the trees near the cabin, singing without being startled by her shouting. I poured myself a glass of cold water and sat with it in my hand, watching the reflection of the sunset on the lake. Karen remained behind her curtains, every so often peeking out, as if hoping I would suddenly vanish. But each time she saw me still there, calm and steady, her shoulders seemed to sink a little lower. She had spent years making others feel small, yet now the weight of her own actions pressed down on her. I thought of all the neighbors she had bothered, the arguments she had started over parking spots or garden fences. Now she had shown her true colors in front of the very people she relied on to believe her stories. The quiet felt like justice. As night came, I lit a small lantern on the porch, the warm glow stretching across the wooden deck. The water shimmered silver under the moonlight, and the forest behind the cabin hummed with the sound of crickets. It was the kind of peace I had dreamed of, and nothing Karen could do would take it away now. From across the way, I saw her porch light flick on, but she never stepped outside. For once, she had nothing left to say. The night grew deeper, and the stars filled the sky over the lake. I sat quietly, listening to the steady rhythm of the water against the dock. The silence was broken only by the distant sound of an owl calling from the woods. Karen's house stayed lit, but she did not come out, not even once. It was strange to see her so quiet when usually she was the loudest presence on the lake. I leaned back in my chair, remembering all the times she had tried to push me or others around. Every complaint, every false report, every time she acted like she was the law itself. Now the very law she had trusted to help her had turned the truth back on her. The memory of her pale face when the officer read my documents was still clear in my mind. It was not anger or even defiance, it was the look of someone who had finally realized she was powerless. The more I thought about it, the more I understood that Karen was not just embarrassed, she was afraid. Afraid that the control she clung to had vanished in a single moment. I stood up and walked down toward the dock, letting the cool wood settle beneath my feet. The lake reflected the stars like a mirror, and for the first time in a long while I felt completely at peace. From behind me through the trees, I could see a faint flicker as Karen moved past her window, still watching, still restless. But no matter how much she watched, nothing was going to change the truth she had been forced to face. The night air was cool as I sat on the edge of the dock, letting my feet dangle above the dark water. The reflection of the moon shimmered, with each ripple spreading across the surface like silver threads. For the first time, I could breathe without the weight of Karen's constant interference. Behind me, the cabins were quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound of nature feel louder and sharper. A splash of fish near the reeds, a whisper of wind through the trees, the distant call of a loon drifting across the lake. I leaned back on my hands and looked toward the tree line, remembering how long I had waited for peace like this. Owning the land had always been more than just a matter of paperwork for me. It was about creating a place where I could escape from noise and conflict. And yet here was Karen, still pacing behind her curtains, unable to accept the truth. Her house glowed faintly in the distance, but the light never reached the calm water. It was a strange picture, her restless shadow framed against a place that no longer bent to her rules. I wondered how long she would keep trying to fight against something she could never change. The land was mine, the cabin was mine, and the peace of this lake was mine too. No matter how many times she called the police or raised her voice, she could not rewrite the truth that had already been spoken aloud in front of everyone. The stars grew brighter as the night deepened, and I lay back on the dock staring up at the endless sky. The gentle lapping of the water against the wooden posts carried a rhythm that soothed every thought in my head. It was strange how quickly calm could return once the storm had passed. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in the scent of pine drifting from the forest. When I opened them again, I saw a faint movement across the lake. Karen's silhouette lingered at her window, her figure small against the dim glow of her living room lamp. She stood there as if waiting for me to disappear, as if her watchful eyes could change what she already knew. But the longer she stood, the more powerless she appeared. I almost felt pity for her. Almost. I rose from the dock and walked slowly back up toward the cabin, the gravel crunching softly under my shoes. The porch light cast a warm circle around the steps, and I sank into the chair once more, letting the wood creak beneath me. In the stillness, I thought about how many people Karen had tried to intimidate before. Neighbors who never pushed back, people who simply wanted peace, but gave in to avoid her wrath. Now the truth had spread, and there would be no taking it back. Karen could glare from behind her curtains every night if she wanted, but the authority she pretended to have was gone forever. The lake belonged to its quiet nights, its silver waters, and the people who respected it, not to her tantrums and false claims. The crickets grew louder as the night settled deeper around the cabin. I leaned back in the porch chair, my eyes tracing the shadows of the trees swaying in the breeze. The air carried the cool scent of water and pine, a mix that had always reminded me why I loved this place so much. Across the way, Karen still lingered by her window, her figure faint against the curtain. She shifted every so often, pacing as though her restless thoughts would not let her sleep. I could almost imagine the storm in her mind, the disbelief, the anger, the humiliation of losing control in front of the police. Her silence now was a different kind of noise, a quiet reminder that her reign over this place was finished. I let out a slow breath and looked toward the dock where the lantern I had left glowed faintly, casting light over the still water. It shimmered like melted gold, drifting with the gentle waves. This land was more than a property line on a piece of paper. It was freedom. Freedom from voices like Karen's that always tried to dictate where you could stand or what you could enjoy. I could feel that freedom in every sound of the night and every flicker of starlight over the lake. And no matter how tightly Karen clung to her bitterness, nothing could take it away from me now. The night stretched on, quiet and steady, wrapping the lake in a calm that felt unshakable. I sat with my hands resting on the arms of the chair, listening to the soft creak of the porch as the wood settled under me. From time to time, I glanced across the water and saw Karen still hovering near her window, unable to let go of what had happened. Her figure moved back and forth in restless loops, as if pacing would somehow undo the truth she had been forced to face. I sipped the last of my drink, letting the cool taste linger, while my eyes followed the lantern glow reflecting across the ripples. The lake had always been a place of refuge for me, and now it felt even stronger, as if the land itself was reminding me that it had always been mine. The forest whispered with the rustle of leaves, and an owl hooted from somewhere deep in the trees. Even the night creatures seemed at ease now that the shouting and commotion had passed. Karen's light flickered as she pulled her curtain shut, but even in hiding, she could not escape the reality that weighed on her. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, feeling the stillness of the night settle inside me. For the first time, I realized that this was more than just a victory over Karen. It was the beginning of a new chapter where her voice no longer carried power over this place. The night air grew cooler as the stars reached their brightest over the lake. I stood and walked down to the dock one last time, letting the wood press gently under my steps. The water shimmered in silence, reflecting the sky like a mirror. Behind me, Karen's cabin was dark now, her window no longer glowing, her fight finally gone quiet. I took a deep breath and felt the peace I had been waiting for settle firmly into place. This land was mine, this calm was mine, and no one could take it away. The lake whispered softly in the dark, carrying with it the promise of many more nights just like this. For the first time in a long while, I smiled, knowing the battle was finished, and the peace was finally mine to keep.